Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Would You Read It Challenge video for May 2024. The Would You Read It Challenge is a meme that was brought to BookTube by @2Brody. I'll link their information down below. The purpose of the meme was to, or the tag I guess, was to read the first sentence of a variety of books that you choose for whatever reason, and then ask your audience if they'd want to continue with said book. I thought that one sentence is a little short to make that judgment, so I've kind of expanded it to the first few paragraphs. And for the past several months, I've been playing with books on the ballot of old BookTube prizes. So the BookTube prize was brought to BookTube and the larger internet book community by Robert Sheard, and the purpose is to judge the best of literary fiction and nonfiction published in the US the year before. We're currently in the 2024 season in the quarterfinals, which is round 2 of 4. We're at really the very end of this round, meaning that official judges like me, or at least those of us who are in my situation, have to do some rapid all-nighter type activity to make it in time to judge our to submit our ballots. And we can't talk about what we're officially judging right now, so that we don't, taint the judging pool with, our own opinions. It's all supposed to be, personal opinions. So anyway, I decided, though, that I love this prize so much that I like talking about it, and I can go back to ballots from yesteryear and discuss those books. So right now I am looking at the fiction round for 2020, Octafinals Group B. The Octafinals are our longest long list of 48 books per division, so I'm just going through and seeing what I think of all of these books. So of the 6 books in Octafinals Group B, I've only read one of them, and I read that one because it made it to the finals of the BookTube prize in 2020, and I was reading for that round. Other than that, I'm looking at these books for the first time. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share the first few paragraphs with you and then give my thoughts. So without further ado, let's get into it, starting with book number 1. The day was flat. That morning, his mind had abandoned him and left his body wandering down below. The empty body went listlessly through its routine, pale and vacant-eyed under the fluorescent strip lights, as his soul floated above the aisles and thought only of tomorrow. Tomorrow was something to look forward to. Shuggy was methodical in setting up for his shift. All the pots and oily dips and spreads were decanted into clean trays. The edges were wiped free of any splashes that would go brown quickly and ruin the illusion of freshness. The sliced hams were artfully arranged with fake parsley sprigs, and the olives were turned so that the viscous juice slid like mucus over their green skins. Anne McGee had the brass neck to call in sick again that morning, leaving him with the thankless task of running his deli counter and her rotisserie stand all alone. No day ever started well with 6 dozen raw chickens, and today of all days it was stealing the sweetness out of his daydreams. And that was from Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. Book 2. Overture to America. I had a professor in college, Mary Maroney, who taught Melville and Emerson, and who once famous Norman O. Brown, her mentor, called the finest mind of her generation, a diminutive, cherubic woman in her early 30s with a resemblance to a Raphaelesque Puto that was not incidental. Her parents had immigrated from Urbino. A scholar of staggering erudition, who quoted as easily from the Eddas and Hannah Arendt as she did from Moby Dick. A lesbian, which I only mention because she did often. A lecturer whose turns of phrase were sharp as a German paring knife, could score the brain's gray matter and carve out new grooves along which old thoughts would reroute. As on that February morning, 2 weeks after Bill Clinton's first inauguration, when, during a class on life under early American capitalism, Mary, clearly interrupted by her own tantalizing thought, looked up from the floor at which she usually gazed at as she spoke, her left hand characteristically buried in the pocket of the loose-fitting slacks that were her mainstay, looked up and remarked almost offhandedly that America had begun as a colony and that a colony it remained, that is, a place still defined by its plunder, where enrichment was paramount and civil order was always an afterthought. The fatherland in whose name and for whose benefit the predation continued was no longer a physical fatherland but a spiritual one, the American self. Long trained to worship its desires, however discreet, however banal, rather than question them, as the classical tradition taught, ever tumescent American self-regard was the pillaging patria, she said, and the marauding years of the Reagan regime had only expressed this enduring reality of American life with greater clarity and transparency than ever before. And that was from Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar. Book 3. I had known him almost all my life, Beniek. He lived around the corner from us in our neighborhood in Wrocław, composed of rounded streets and three-story apartment buildings that from the air formed a giant eagle, the symbol of our nation. There were hedges and wide courtyards with a little garden for each flat, and cool, damp cellars and dusky attics. It hadn't even been 20 years since any of our families had come to live there. Our postboxes still said brief in German. Everyone, the people who'd lived here before and the people who replaced them, had been forced to leave their homes. From one day to the next, the continent's borders had shifted, redrawn like the chalk lines of the hopscotch we played on the pavement. At the end of the war, the east of Germany became Poland, and the east of Poland became the Soviet Union. Granny's family was forced to leave their land near Lwów. The Soviets took their house and hauled them on the same cattle trains that had brought the Jews to the camps a year or two earlier. They ended up in Wrocław, a city inhabited by the Germans for hundreds of years, in a flat only just deserted by some family we'd never know, their dishes still in the sink, their breadcrumbs on the table. This is where I grew up. And that was from Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jadrowski. Book 4. Ivy Lynn was a thief, but you would never know it to look at her. Maybe that was the problem. No one ever suspected, and that made her reckless. Her features were so average and nondescript that the brain only needed a split second to develop a complete understanding of her. Skinny Asian girl, quiet, overly docile around adults in uniforms. She had a way of walking, shoulders forward, chin tucked under, arms barely swinging, that rendered her invisible in the way of pigeons and janitors. Ivy would have traded her face 1,000 times over for a blue-eyed, blonde-haired version like the Satterfield twins, or even a red-headed, freckly version like Liza Johnson, instead of her own Chinese one with its too thin lips, embarrassingly high forehead, too fleshy cheeks like ripe apples before the autumn pickings. Because of those cheeks, at 14 years old, she was often mistaken for an elementary school student, an unfortunate hindrance at everything except thieving, in which her childlike looks were a useful camouflage. And that was from White Ivy by Susie Yang. Book 5. Once we lived in a summer country. In the woods there were tree houses, and on the lake there were boats. Even the smallest canoe could take us down to the ocean. We'd paddle across the lake, over a marsh, down a stream, and come to the river's mouth, where the water met the sky. We'd run along the beach on a salt breeze, leaving our boots on the sand. We found the skull of a dinosaur, or maybe a porpoise. We found skate eggs and shark eye shells and sea glass. Before the sun set, we'd paddle back to the lake, returning for dinner. Loons sent their haunting calls across the water. To wash the sand from our ankles, we jumped off the dock and screamed. We dove and flipped as the sky turned violet. And that was from A Children's Bible by Lydia Millay. And finally, Book 6. He was walking almost beside her, 2 steps behind. She did not look back. She said, "I'm not talking to you. I completely understand. If you did completely understand, you wouldn't be following me." He said, "When a fellow takes a girl out to dinner, he has to see her home." "No, he doesn't have to. Not if she tells him to go away and leave her alone." "I can't help the way I was brought up," he said. But he crossed the street and walked alongside her across the street. When they were a block from where she lived, he came across the street again. He said, "I do want to apologize. I don't want to hear it, and don't bother trying to explain." "Thank you. I mean, I'd rather not try to explain, if that's all right." "Nothing is all right. All right has no place in this conversation." Still, her voice was soft. I understand, of course, but I can't quite resign myself. And that was from Jack by Marilyn Robinson. Okay, well, I might do these in order, starting with book one, which is the book I read, Shuggie Bain. And I feel like this setting, and really most of these, beginnings are rather dull in a way, or really slow. I feel like this doesn't necessarily do the book justice. I mean, guess we're getting that Shuggie is setting up for work, but it sort of belies a lot of the drama of what's to come in this book, where we're following this working class boy and especially his mother. I feel like the odd thing about this book is that really it was more his mother's book about her addictions, and he kind of was the incidental main character. But Stewart's writing is just, for the most part, so forceful and visceral that I think it's made quite an impression on the literary community. So we've judged this book, and then his second book also made it very far in the BookTube Prize a few years later. So he might be a darling, a favorite. Who knows what he's working on now. But yeah, this book and his other book are very much about working class conditions in post-Thatcher Scotland. Then we have book number two, which for all of its little snippets of detail kind of reads a little like a polemic. Maybe you can't really get away from it because, the subject matter is overtly political, and this, apparently high and mighty professor giving her rambling opinion about America and its capitalist past and what that means about our psychology, I suppose. I don't know, I guess you can say technically that some professors are so great that they can't keep their thoughts straight, but mostly this is a long, rambling, exhausting paragraph. And I don't know, I feel like it could bar some from entry, especially because of the polemic nature of it. And the quotes aren't even real quotes. In fact, all of these books, except for one of them, don't have any quotes of actual human beings talking to each other in real time in the first few paragraphs. So that's something. And yeah, that was from Homeland Elegies. And now I'll move on to book three, Swimming in the Dark, which actually is a long paragraph, not quite as long and not quite as convoluted as the last one. I think in a way it interests me the most, except it's, less about technically what's happening in real time, because very little is happening in real time. It's all setup and backstory. I mean, the first sentence is about this guy Beniak and the narrator knowing him, and then we basically jump completely away from that. I mean, I guess vaguely speaking, he's talking about what brought his family, I'm assuming the narrator's a he, I guess, but what brought his family to their current home. And it's talking a lot about the post-war politics in a very frank way. I mean, it's a reminder about how many borders and cultural groups really shifted after World War II, including in Central and Eastern Europe. And so I really enjoyed getting this history and this reminder of what was happening in other places. But it is all backstory, so hopefully they'd, go ahead and, start the story now that we kind of know who and where, I guess, these main characters are. And then for book four, which is White Ivy, this one seems the most pedestrian to me. It's also, I think, the book I remember the least, so I wonder if it, I guess, over time, its reputation has kind of become more, mediocre in a way, or, eh. And I just feel like, in general, this setup is just relatively pedestrian about setting up this young girl who is uncomfortable in her own skin and seems younger than she is, and there's a little bit of commentary that could like read into racial realities, like living in a Western culture as a non-Western person, and it kind of can mess with your sense of yourself and what beauty is, that sort of thing. And so anyway, these two paragraphs are about Ivy, who kind of doesn't fit in, except that her two young looks can help her steal. And it seems like she might have mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure. But overall, this was easy to read, so I feel like that could, I mean, it's a thing in its favor. But I would say, like, in general, there's the writing is just, average, and the setup is relatively something familiar and usual about, you know, a young girl not feeling comfortable in her skin. So hopefully we'll have some more intriguing details down the road in this book. And then we have book 5, A Children's Bible, which is all detail as well, and not really the start of the story. It's just scene setting about like this beautiful location. And I love all of these details about, you know, being on the stream and like finding skulls of maybe a dinosaur, maybe a porpoise. I mean, obviously it's imaginative. It makes me think that the narrators are probably pretty young. There's sort of a nostalgic childhood feel to this narration. And so it's all scene setting, but it's all very, you know, it's evocative. It's like a place that I think fits the bill of where you would like to spend time as a child. Although I assume after this, sooner or later, a story will have to start. I feel like that's a big thing I have to say about all of these is, you know, there's some interesting details, but we don't quite jump immediately into the story for any of them, including with book number 6, which is Jack by Marilynne Robinson, which out of all the books I haven't read, I feel like this is the book I'm not most drawn to because of the page, but I'm most drawn to because of Robinson's reputation and these books she wrote. I believe this is about her family of, I guess, Midwestern Protestant denomination people, like, and one is, you know, in the clergy, and then the rest are family, and she just jumps from character to character, I think, in this family, I'm pretty sure, but, you know, she's sort of a darling of contemplative literary fiction about family. But I have to say, you know, at first I was very excited because this is the only section that begins with actual dialogue, but not much is happening between the dialogue between these two characters who aren't even named. It's just sort of an overwrought date gone wrong, it seems like. But, you know, we don't even know why, because they are, like, intentionally speaking so vaguely. So I have to say, I'm a little disappointed that this is my intro, as it were, to Robinson, and I wish it could be something a little more dynamic than this. But I assume because of her fame, I mean, she has literary fame, so you don't need a lot of plot, and you certainly don't want too much drama, but at least people should have names and specific grievances with one another. We have to get to that sooner or later. So yeah, I guess out of all of these books, out of all the 5 I haven't read, if I were to read one, I'd actually go with Swimming in the Dark by Tomas Jadrowski. And I'd want to continue on from this post-World War II German reality. And hopefully, you know, that promise in the first sentence of a relationship in the present day would come forth. But in all honesty, I'm not going to be adding any of these books to my TBR because I'm already overwhelmed by what's on my TBR already. But I do like to pick a favorite in these videos. So that about covers it for me now, and you can find links to all of these books, their Goodreads pages, listed down below, as well as my review for Shuggie Bain. And yeah, I would love also to hear your thoughts about these books, whether you read them or whether this is your first introduction to them. And I hope my current fellow BookTube Prize judges are doing well. Perhaps some of you actually have already submitted your ballots and are sitting pretty, and how nice for you! And for the rest of us, we probably shouldn't be watching this, at least in real time, shortly after I post it. We should be reading instead. So anyway, I'll be back on this channel imminently to share my book haul for May, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.